He trained 10,000 priests and Levites as stonemasons and carpenters and builders. And they tore down the temple from the inside out because, of course, only a priest or Levite could go into the inner part of the temple. And the sacrifices didn't stop. The work of the temple didn't stop. The liturgical life of the Jews didn't stop. And suddenly, growing out from itself was this beautiful building. Herod couldn't expand the dimensions of the temple, so he built up a building that was kind of a low, dark, ugly, brown little building, grew to 13 stories tall and was plated in the front with gold. It said that in the morning sun it hurt to look at the temple. It was so brilliant and bright that your eyes hurt if you looked at it at sunrise, reflected so perfectly the light of the rising sun. It was an amazing building. And he expanded the platform, the flattened out part of the hill on which the temple was built. I think he expanded it by 5 times. It's huge. It's about 10 football fields big. You can still see it in Jerusalem. It was unbelievable. And he surrounded it with law courts and colonnades and places for teachers. And the Supreme Court of the Jews met there. Animals were sold there for sacrifice. It was magnificent. And all over was gold and marble and white limestone. It looked like when you came at it at a distance, it looked like a great snow-covered mountain. And it was thought to be the most beautiful building in the ancient world. And Herod built that not for the honor and glory of God, but for the honor and glory of Herod. He built it to prove what a good Jew he was. Now, meanwhile, in the north, way north, where part of his kingdom had very few Jews, it just had Greeks, there was a grotto in the side of a huge, I don't know how else to call it. It was a huge rock. It was about the size of this church and 5 times as long. And in it there was a cave, and out of this cave there was a spring that flowed. And it was a shrine, a sanctuary to the god Pan. You've seen Pan in pictures. He's the one with the top half is a man, the bottom half is a goat. And he's usually playing a little pipe and might have little horns and ears. Pan, the god Pan. It was the sanctuary of the god Pan, where nature gods were worshipped. And Herod built there at this spring that was the source of the River Jordan that flowed out of this cave. The ancients believed that this cave had no bottom to it, and they would throw sacrifices into it. Well, in front of this cave, Herod built a beautiful white gleaming temple, not to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but he built it to the divine Augustus who had made him king of the Jews. So in Jerusalem, Herod worshipped the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the God of Abraham. In Banyas, in the north, he worshipped Augustus, who was the power of the age. So Herod lived in 2 worlds, and he believed in neither. Now, in the gospel today, we read that Jesus goes to this place, Caesarea Philippi, that Philip, Herod's son, one of the ones he didn't kill because he wasn't descended from the Jewish kings, Mariamne and her family. But Herod Philip, his son, built this town, expanded it, and called it Caesarea in honor of Caesar. But it had been begun, this beautiful temple to Augustus had been built by his father, Herod the Great. So they come to Caesarea Philippi, and there's all this splendor that speaks of the political power and the cultural power of Augustus, the Emperor Augustus, and the King Herod, who had the power of life and death over anyone. Herod, he was hated. And he arrested, when he was sick and knew he was dying, he arrested the most prominent citizens of Judea. And he had them locked in prison with orders to kill them the moment he died. And he said, so at least there would be weeping in Judah when I die. Well, he died and they were all released. But there was rejoicing in Judah when he died. Well, this powerful man with his symbol of power, this beautiful, gleaming white temple. Well, Jesus, the poor carpenter, and his ragtag followers who had been walking through Lebanon for months, they must have looked like you and I would look after 3 weeks of vacation. You must have heard the saying, when you look like your passport photo, it's time to go home. Well, these people must have looked pretty beat up after traveling for a few months. And in the midst of all of this splendor, which spoke of the power of the Roman emperors and the power of Augustus, Jesus says to Peter, who do people say that I am? Some say John the Baptist, risen from the dead. Some say Elijah or Jeremiah. And then he looks at them squarely and he says, but who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. In the backdrop was this huge mountain, this hill into which this temple had been built and from which the river Jordan flowed. The gods of the culture were enshrined there. Peter was able to see that this was the Son of God, not the emperor, not Herod. And he said, blessed are you. Upon this rock I will build my church. And he gave Peter the name Cephas, which means rock. Now, two things. These places, the temple in Jerusalem and this cave at Banias, had two things in common. There were temples built on them, but both of them were called the gates of hell. Both of them were called the gates of hell. Now, when we think of hell, we think of people in red union suits with pitchforks torturing you. The ancients had very fuzzy concepts of heaven and hell. It was Hades, the underworld, where the spirits of the dead went. And there were gods of the underworld. It wasn't quite our concept of hell. But this cave from which came this spring was considered a gate, an entrance to the underworld. And the Jews believed that the great rock on which the temple had been built was like a cork in the underworld, that it was a gate to the underworld. Fact is, it was called the Well of the Souls. You might have, in the Raiders of the Lost Ark, they talk about the Well of the Souls. Well, that was in Jerusalem. It was just a little indentation under the altar. You can go there now. Well, they won't let you in because they're not letting in anyone but Muslims. But things will change. So, both of these places were considered entryways into the underworld. And both of them were symbols of Herod and the culture of the day. And Jesus says, the gates of hell will not prevail against my kingdom, which I place into your hands, Peter. Jesus was not simply talking about heaven and hell in our concept. Certainly he included that. But he was speaking about a very specific place and a very specific reality, I believe. He was talking about a culture and a political power and a world. And this is the point that, good Lord, I'm finally going to make. We live in a world culture, don't we? We are more like Herod than we are like Peter and Paul. Because we think we can worship God at this altar. But in our daily life, we worship this culture in which we live. We allow the culture in which we live to make our moral decisions.